Where we last left off, we had just gone live with the solution, and so now we'll talk about what do you do after that go live date. So the three kind of key things we're going to highlight today is first Hypercare. So what is Hypercare? What does that word mean? What is that period of time, and what can you expect during Hypercare? Then we'll talk about how to plan out your future releases. How do you incorporate those things that maybe didn't get done in the original plan? And then how do you enhance your system, or how should you be thinking about how to make that system better in the future? So let's kind of reframe on where we are in the implementation process. So at this point in the align, define, create, deploy, empower set of proven process stages, we are going to cover actually the end of the deploy phase. You can see kind of Hypercare as one of the bullets there. And then we'll be talking about the empower phase. So that's where we are in the overall proven process flow. So Hypercare, when you look up Hypercare online, it will actually tell you that it's like some kind of medical approach. I forgot where I had written this down, so I don't remember exactly what it means. But when we're talking about in ERP or CRM implementation or any kind of business applications implementation, Hypercare is pretty different. So it's essentially that time immediately following a go live where you've got an elevated level of support available to ensure that users can use the system effectively. So what's hyper about it is you get extra resources during that time, and your team needs to be extra committed to supporting the team during that period. So that's really where the Hypercare word comes in and how that makes sense. So let's talk about what happens in those weeks of Hypercare. So Hypercare could last anywhere from 2 weeks to 12 weeks, depending on the amount of complexity that you have in your implementation. As a general rule, it should, if you're doing ERPs, it should last through your first month end. Sometimes it could be through your second month end if you've got a significant amount of work that needs to be done. But depending on how long it is, these are kind of typical things that happen during those weeks as you go live. So first off, in week one, the project team is typically on site. So you've got your consultants that worked on the project on site. Many of them may have stayed over through the go live weekend as well. And then you should also have your team members on site where your users are to support them as they initially use the system. So week one, everybody knows that the brand new system, we got to put all hands on deck to make sure that week one goes well. And that's typically is successful because of the amount of care that everybody knows to put into the solution right away after it went live. So week two then is a little bit different. It kind of quiets down a little bit. A lot of times the project team ends up being remote that week, and the help desk will start handling issues as they've come up. So in week one, a lot of times you don't log everything that you have if you've got somebody next to you who can help you get through it. But project week two is where you start to get into, okay, now let's get into more of a normal support mode where you don't necessarily have a knowledgeable person sitting next to you as you enter your first set of transactions. So week two can be challenging just because there's not quite that attention level that there often is in week one, and it's kind of normalizing what needs to be done. So week 3 and 4 can be like a mix of on-site and remote. So again, you're still kind of a continuation of week 2 where you don't have people sitting next to you necessarily, but you are still kind of working through issues. A lot of times in week 3 and 4, and sometimes even in week 2, you start to have hot fix releases that you have to put in place. So there's some testing and work that has to go along with that. But in week 3 or 4, you really start to work towards handing off the project then from the consultants who originally implemented it to the support folks within your partner organization. And you should think about that as well too for your project team who's working on it, is they're going to start to make sure that the help desk team can better handle issues as you get into week 3 and 4. And then week 5 and 6 is generally your first month end. And the first month end in any time you do an ERP implementation is quite challenging. So you really need to put a lot of focus on that. If you're typically close in 7 days or something like that, your first month end, you're unlikely to be able to close within 7 days because you're now documenting a whole bunch of new processes that you've never done before in a system you haven't used before to do this month end, and sometimes with bad data going into it. So the first month end needs a lot of attention, and you need some financial consultants on site to help you through everything that you need to do to get it done. It's going to be a big effort to get through that first month end. And then after week 6, so that might drag on for 2 weeks, and then after that point is where you get into reviewing more of the help desk trends, and you kind of get into kind of the normal support period. So this hypercare period, as a general rule, I usually like to say it lasts about 6 weeks, and with the first week being heavy, and then it kind of lessening, and then popping back up again for the first month end. And then once you're done with the first month end and you've normalized issues, then that's when the consulting team is actually going to roll off and fully transition to support. So that consulting team now, who might have worked on your project, will now be transitioning to new projects. So with the system implemented, you'll be moving to support folks. The consultants will be moving on to new projects. And you, as a client, typically don't want to have the cost of having that many people continuing to work on your project. You want to go to a more pay as you need help kind of solution at that point. So as well, your project team members also are going to be going back to their day job. So if your controller and your business process owner, your manufacturing director, who've been really highly involved in the project now, are going to take back more of what they were doing before in their day job. And during this period, then you need to move to a really sustainable support model for the long term. So you got to make sure that when you come out of hypercare, when a ticket goes to help desk, it's going to get somewhere, right? If you're reliant on the project team members having to solve everything, they're not going to be able to actually go back to their day job. So it's really important as you work through hypercare to make sure that you do set your long-term process up and you do get people using that long-term process as quickly as possible. And then from an implementation partner standpoint, you want to make sure that as you're working with partners, you're introduced to who your account manager or client success manager is, who are your support team members. You generally get introduced to them before go live, then they start getting more and more involved in weeks 1 and 2, and then they're involved to kind of take you forward from here. So building a good relationship with them early on is important as you get into the more normal support mode. And then you'll do typically an official handoff. So you'll do a closeout of the project, and at that point, all things should be wrapped up. You should be comfortable with how the project closed out, and then you do an official handoff to support. So again, if you need a consultant in the future, you would request something from support, and then if they are stuck, they would go back and reach out to the consultants that worked on the project. So that's an important part of this transition is, again, you're moving from this dedicated project team, both internally from your client standpoint as well as from a consulting standpoint. And then you're moving this into, if you think about it, just another app that you're supporting within your company. Now, again, ERPs and CRM systems can be really the heartbeat of your business, so they're very important and probably require more attention than necessarily supporting Outlook or Exchange. But the idea should be it should be handled the same way that you handle other applications that you support within your company. So now let's talk about how things progress from a help desk standpoint. So again, you want to make sure at least by week 2, if not even week 1, you are using your help desk process. So tickets should go into whatever normal help desk you have. We have help desk at Stoneridge Software here. So any ticket that comes in that has to do with our F&O system or our CRM system starts there. So then there are different tiers that you want to make sure you've got lined up as you start using this process. So tier 1 is going to be your help desk team. So those will be the folks that have typically taken those help desk requests for you across all the other applications that you use in the business. So they're going to be able, you want to have them solve, of course, as much as they possibly can solve. A lot of times it's security, user setup issues. I can't access Business Central for whatever reason. They should be trying to tackle those types of solutions. But then they will need to have a path where they can escalate then to tier 2. And so your tier 2 team is going to be, depending on where you are and how long you've been live, could be a number of different groups. So it could be your project team, and certainly in the hypercare period it is, because they're most knowledgeable about how the solution works and where and how to support it. It could, as you get longer term, if you have business analysts that are set up for the various lines of business that you have, those business analysts could be a help desk resource as well. And then if you have other IT application resources like senior developers or architects, or if you have operations teams where you might need to reach out to a manufacturing director to ask about a process-oriented question. So if the IT help desk team gets a, well, how should we do this kind of question, then they're probably going to have to go to tier 2, which might actually be going to the manager of the person who asked the question to say, here's a process-oriented question. So in the very beginning, post go live, a lot of questions go right from tier 1 to tier 2, but you need to make sure that you're using this practice so that everyone's used to submitting these tickets through help desk. One of the mistakes that I see people make is they have a friend who's in the tier 2 group, and they just go right to them or send them an email. And then that way it doesn't get tracked. The tier 1 help desk folks don't get a chance to learn. And then tier 3 would be when you reach out to your implementation partner. Again, so you shouldn't reach out to your implementation partner with an easy end user question. You generally want to limit the people that can ask questions to your partner to a small number of folks that are at that tier 2 level, or maybe a manager of your help desk team, because you just don't want to incur the expense associated with asking those questions. So those tier 2 folks should say, hey, we need to escalate this to a partner to get this resolved, and then they'll jump in. And then tier 4 is when you would have to reach out, and typically when the partner is going to reach out to Microsoft or maybe one of your ISVs that you are using to get a resolution on something. So generally, after the partner's looked at it, they've figured out, okay, if there's something we can solve, we've solved it. If there's something that is that we can't solve or we can see is clearly a bug, then we're going to reach out to Microsoft or any of the ISVs that might be in play there as well too. So typically, like when we send out support contracts to clients, we identify what all the ISVs that are in scope, and then we work to make sure that we've got connections to those ISVs that we can escalate a case to them if we need to do that. So that's the typical help desk progression between tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you want to make sure all of these are lined up. Everyone knows who's in what tier. You understand a little bit about what the escalation process is between these various different tiers, so that when you start using this process, it's ready to go. So I talked about this last time, is like this is something you should be doing in the deployment phase, is making sure that you've got this progression set up and ready to go. All right, so we've gotten through support, and now let's talk about the hypercare period and how to handle that well. Let's talk about how to handle some initiatives that you might have after go live. So some of the things you think about: first, your support, and then you've got this ongoing maintenance. And ongoing maintenance is a real thing that you will experience after going live. So we talked about last time about how you can go live with some priority 2 bugs, but you generally don't want to have a lot of them. If you do go live with some tier 2, some priority 2 bugs, you're going to have some maintenance work that you're going to need to do after you go live in the form of hot fixes or releases. So figuring out your plan in terms of how you're going to do those hot fix releases is something you should do in the deployment phase. So a hot fix release is a release that happens out of cycle. And so that would be something you would do if you've got a priority 1 bug that's popped up, or if you have a series of priority 2 bugs and you've made the call that you want to just get them out there and get them into the system. The pros and cons of the hotfix release are, the pro is you get a fix in the environment faster. The big con is that it is oftentimes a little bit rushed and you didn't go back and do full testing on the whole system as part of this hotfix release. So that is a real challenge that you should be aware of, that oftentimes, I mean, not all the time for sure, but it does happen that a hotfix release could introduce another problem because the code that came in to fix something may have broken something else. So that's the thing to be thinking about as you look to do hotfix releases. The other ongoing maintenance, so your priority 3, priority 4 bugs, those should be going into regular releases so you have sufficient time to test them and make sure that they are going to work well when they get introduced into the system. And then the other thing to be thinking about is your post-go live initiatives is, what is the value of the investment and have you achieved your success criteria, and are there things you can do now that will help you get more value out of this new platform you've put in place? So let's talk about these scheduled releases. So a scheduled release is something that you do on a monthly or quarterly basis, or every 4 weeks if you're on the sprint, on your sprint plans, but it should be a release that you do to enhance the solution, and you should have this regularly scheduled. So again, whether you decide to do that monthly, quarterly, I recommend just after go live that you have a release typically within the next month to try to clean up some of those issues that didn't get done in time for go live. And then after that, you can decide if you want to do them monthly or do them quarterly. I recommend everyone do scheduled releases at least on a quarterly basis. Again, that allows you to keep enhancing your system as well as getting more bug fixes into the solution. So yeah, even 2 weeks in the beginning is good. You can consider that a little bit of a hotfix type of a release, but the sooner that first release comes after go live, it's generally a good thing to make sure you're cleaning up any issues that are out there. So again, then you go to 4 weeks or once per quarter after that. And so how does it work? So you identify those issues that are that you're managing through that Azure DevOps. So you put bugs into them, you prioritize them, and then you try to figure out how many of these can we knock out in the time that we have to get ready for it. And then you also look at enhancements. Are there things that you can enhance, whether it might be a report, another function that you can add to the system? Prioritize those, figure out how much time they're going to take, and then get them into the cycle so that they can get done in time. You want to make sure your development is done in advance of that release. So if your release is going to be on July 1st, you want to make sure that everything has been code complete by like the week before to make sure that you have time to test it. Because then once everything's done, again, it's similar to your original go live, just on a condensed basis, is you want to put that into your test and UAT environment, and then you want to be able to do some testing to make sure it doesn't break the other areas of the product. So you can have a long debate about the different ways to do testing. Certainly you want to test the new stuff that's going in, and then regression testing is the process of testing things that are already live. So what you generally want to do there is you want to regression test those key items that are most important to your system. So again, if you want a regression test, which just means go back and test again, like getting a sales order out, you can't get a sales order out, your system isn't very valuable. So when you put new code in, you want to go back and test those really core things that are requirements in the system. Now you can use some automated testing tools to do that kind of thing, or you can manually do it. You don't necessarily have to test every little thing as part of every future release, right? If there's something in fixed assets and you didn't and your new code is going in a different area, you don't necessarily have to go back and make sure that your depreciation schedules can be set up properly in fixed assets, for instance. But anything that's kind of close to what's getting touched by new code should have a little attention put to it. And then what are the risks? Now, generally with scheduled releases, the risks are a little bit lower. It all comes down to how thoroughly you've tested it. And we do see clients who go ahead with these scheduled releases, but they don't do any regression testing. So again, if that new code ends up breaking something you had in the system before, you're going to end up with with more work potentially to undo some of the stuff that you put in there. And then the biggest challenge is just getting people's time to retest things. So when you say to somebody who's just gone through a go live, hey, I need you to test this stuff that you've tested a million times prior to go live again, and they might be not too excited about having to do that because they've already tested it over and over and over again. But now you're testing it as it relates to new code that's coming in. So getting it to be a priority on the team's time can be a challenge. Obviously, if you have a dedicated QA resource, then they know that testing is their job, and that's not too hard to do. But most of the time, it's subject matter experts that you're asking to jump in and do some testing. So you do need to coordinate their time to make sure that you can get that done successfully. So another reason why you want to do some scheduled releases is Microsoft is going to release updates to the solution. So again, this is an evergreen system. If you're talking about Dynamics 365, these are all cloud-based systems, so there's no longer a big upgrade that you have to do in the future. Any enhancement that Microsoft makes, they put out through updates. So these updates come out then twice a year or more, and those are opportunities there for you to take on new functionality that Microsoft is releasing. So you certainly want to do that, and you want to include Microsoft updates in these scheduled releases that you're doing. So as you do quarterly or monthly releases, make sure you're pulling in the latest Microsoft updates as part of that, because you want to test all that stuff together, right? You don't want to regression test a code piece that you put in and then turn around 2 weeks later and regression test a Microsoft update that's coming out. I will remind everyone too that for the most part, especially in F&O, that you have the ability to turn on, or all of the new features come in turned off, or just about all of them do. So you can choose what features you want to turn on in a lot of these systems as well too. So there's a little less risk if you haven't turned something on yet when you're talking about new changes that are coming in. So the update frequency depends on the product that you're on. For CRM and Business Central, there's typically 2 major updates that occur during the year, typically in April and October. For F&O, there's actually 8 updates that come in every year, and you have to take at least 2 of them. So you should be prepared to make sure that you are taking the latest builds of those solutions when you do your regular updates. And this is also why you don't want to have a policy where you don't have a scheduled update going on or a scheduled release going on, because now you're actually going to get out of compliance with Microsoft's update schedule. So you got to at least do 2 updates a year to be able to take on these new Microsoft enhancements that are coming in. And then Microsoft also does release hotfixes. CE and Business Central, Microsoft will actually push them when they deem it necessary to kick them out. So if something breaks that needs to be fixed in Microsoft's cloud environment, they will actually push a hotfix out to you that you automatically get and don't really have a lot of time to test. So now that these products have been out for a few years, the number of hotfixes is getting less and less. I know it was a challenge for a few of our clients, especially in the CRM. Early on days of the cloud, they were getting stuff pushed out to them, and it was breaking things that they were using. So if you want to avoid having stuff get broken through hotfixes, do things in a supportable way. In some cases, those were clients that were maybe doing something outside a system that wasn't necessarily in the most supported way, and so then it wasn't getting caught by Microsoft's regression testing that it was doing. So generally, Microsoft is going to run regression testing suites on this stuff and try to limit the amount of damage that it might do, but there is always that possibility that you'll have a hotfix get pushed to you, and then you'll have to fix whatever it might have messed up in your system. Again, I wouldn't expect it, but you should be prepared for it. And then F&O, when they release hotfixes, they generally push them out through lifecycle services. So they are made available, and then you can decide when to add those to your environment, which gives you a little bit more control over it. It's the difference between a software as a service solution and more of an infrastructure as a service solution. All right, now let's talk about enhancing your system. So you do want to think about how can you get more value out of this platform you've just put in. Again, you've spent months or years putting in this new solution. It's great plumbing in terms of it allows you to expand your capability very easily through different integrations that you can put in place. So how do you enhance the solution? So one thing a lot of people do is invest in reporting or dashboards. So get Power BI in place and start doing more, connecting that to your data and doing more with reporting and dashboards. So there's huge opportunity there to get insight into the data that you didn't necessarily have before. So highly recommend that you explore what you can do on the reporting or business intelligence front. Other ways that you can do it is after people use it for 3-4 weeks, they might have some suggestions on how to make the solution more usable. This actually happened with one of our recent go lives where they gave us some feedback about how we could make the solution easier for people to use. Well, those are good enhancements to consider to save people time. Another enhancement that people don't necessarily talk a lot about, but we sometimes see come up during implementations is what we call guardrails. And guardrails is really about trying to not let someone do something they shouldn't do in the system. So in a lot of cases in the system, if you click around on enough different buttons, you can actually cause some, you can do things you're not supposed to do, or maybe cause something to work wrong based on data that you put in the system that you shouldn't have put in there. So guardrails are another way you can protect yourself from potential issues there. Another thing to be thinking about is anything that you would have postponed. So all of that priority 3 stuff that just didn't make it to the release, can you get those into your future enhancements? You certainly want to try to do that as best you can. And then any larger items that were de-scoped. So again, your phase 2 items or your bigger projects that you might not have had the chance to get in there, you want to try to get into the system. But again, use these releases as an opportunity for you to enhance the solution, get more out of it. Some of the things like reporting and dashboards with Power BI, you don't necessarily actually need to have any need to release those with the product unless they're customizing forms or reports within the solution. So you can do those releases oftentimes whenever the code is ready or whenever the report's ready. Most of the other things you need to make sure that you've got a code release as part of, but again, having those regular releases where you're taking those Microsoft updates and enhancing the solution are going to make your overall solution more valuable. You'll get more return on investment for what you've put into this overall solution.